Coming from traditional journalism and then making the transition to independent film and technology, I share Harry's passion to give these skills to as many people as possible, that we firmly believe that everybody should be and can be a storyteller. We want to make sure that the University of Washington, as a trusted content creation machine, gets its stories out there as widely as possible, and it begins with you. And so I'm going to try to tell you why that's possible now and why you should be engaging in it. This is the promise of digital media and storytelling, that even in the most controlled, constrained communication systems, and we're not talking about 3 networks controlling America, we're talking about one government controlling a country, that there is now this ability for people to do something fairly disruptive with a really simple piece of technology, or at least a ubiquitous piece of technology such as the cell phone. So suddenly we might think that we are in the midst of this incredible revolution, and in fact they call this the Twitter revolution. This technology isn't just for fun, but it really does empower individuals to get a message or a story out to people and communities well beyond their immediate social circle. And by doing that, you can influence them to join and share ideas that you stand for as well. And so in Iran, where you think that nobody will ever stand up to a dictatorship, all of a sudden people using these technologies start to understand that there are like-minded people out there who have those ideas and who are willing to be courageous about it and actually come to the forefront and start sharing those ideas. And even more importantly, that as our traditional reliance on institutions to tell these stories, such as the BBC or CNN, are thrown out of the country during a really crucial time in the country's history, all of a sudden, the only information that we can get out of there is through these new devices. All of these images that you see on this screen are images shot by Iranians after foreign journalists were thrown out and traditional journalists were shut down. These are all available in Creative Commons licenses on Flickr. So this is the power of the story that's coming through this technology and allowing people to start communing around it. So the big question is, why is this happening now? Why are we being able to break down these institutional frameworks around communication so that people now have this ability to communicate with each other well beyond their social circles and actually affect some kind of social change? Well, I start with the premise that we are now individually a media organization. If I was a backpack journalist as a one-man broadcast studio a few years ago, we now, even as amateurs and non-professionals, have the ability to be media organizations in terms of the power of how we communicate and what we use to communicate with. No reason why you need to send a $100,000 camera crew from Seattle to shoot stories for your new campus in Seattle Center. Why don't you send 100 cameras to your field offices and get some of your farmers in Kenya or your health workers in India and let them shoot their stories and send that content back to you, and all of a sudden you have something that's more visceral and more immediate, not as professional, but you get more stories and it's actually much more cost effective. If we move to more of a conceptual understanding of what's happened, up till the last 6 or 7 years, in terms of communication and storytelling, we live very much in a world of what we call filter then publish. The idea is that we had organizations that would go out and figure out what content is relevant and what people want, and they would create it or they would filter it out for us, whether they were a news organization or a Hollywood studio, and then they would publish it. So it meant that information was very scarce, and these gatekeepers would decide what we would get. We are now moving very quickly, in fact we are now here because of this ubiquitous technology, to this notion of publish then filter. It's basically, I call it shoot first, ask questions later. Because you can, right? And kids are doing it and senior citizens are doing it, that you can just put anything you want out there and make it public. So we have this publish then filter notion. And so the idea is that everything goes out, so there's no longer an information scarcity situation, but we're actually in a situation of almost information overabundance. And then it's up to us as individuals to filter out this stuff, and that is really hard. And so what we're seeing is people are now trying to figure out, well, how do I understand what's relevant to me and start doing that filtering? The one way to do it is what we're seeing right now in this grand battle between Google and Apple and all these other major media organizations, that they want to put a wall back up around the content because that'll actually make it useful and actually provide the business model to keeping it sustained. So the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch is a big fan of the iPad because they said, well, we've been giving away this stuff for free on our websites. If we can actually create a device that is proprietary and locked in, that forces people to pay for this and forces people to actually take the streamlined approach back to where we were in the 20th century, that's where we should go. And I understand and recognize the need to do that, to create sustainable business models for media. I really don't want that to be the only way to do it, because if we return to that, we're going back to the media monopolies that we've had, especially in the 80s and 90s, that had not served us well. And there's a big reason why journalism has declined beyond technology, is that we've just also lost faith in it as a trustworthy medium because of all these intertwined relationships. And I really want to keep this as open as possible. So my solution to creating the filter with all this abundant information is the notion that we want to sort of appeal to people's self-interest. And I call it the reaching out with this value proposition. That the information in media that we're trying to create, that people are going to be attracted to, is going to be these three things, relevant, useful, and relatable. And that people, because of social media and because of blogging and all these ways that communities can be created around technology and stories, is that there's actually an ongoing relationship. It's no longer, I've created a television program, you watch it, it's over. Now it's, I've created a television program, you might actually be involved in the production of it, and then you're going to talk about it even after it's aired. So it becomes this ongoing conversation, an ongoing relationship. And so when you look at this, all these factors involved in what appeals to people's self-interest to pay attention to something, you realize that there's actually, it's part of a timeless, age-old formula that we call storytelling. That people always will pay attention to things that help them make sense of their lives. And so even as we're faced with all this incredible technology and all this amazing information flow, to me, the most useful, organic filter that we could possibly create for people to want to be engaged with our information is to put a story around it. And it sounds really simplistic, but to me, it is the best. I'd rather do that than have iPads and Facebook put walls around everything else. And it really comes from a notion from thousands of years ago, even from a guy like Aristotle, who wrote Poetics, which is very much the Bible for screenwriters in Hollywood, of this notion of a beginning, middle, and end. And I know it sounds really simplistic, but this is crucial to storytelling because it actually creates it takes listeners and audiences on a journey with your stories in a way that when you say, I'm going to tell you a story about something that's about to happen, and you start ratcheting up this tension, which leads to the climax, and then you let them go with a denouement in the end, first of all, they see you as credible because they've created this relationship of trust. They really want to see how it's going to end. And by having this little climactic thing with a letting go of the tension, you've created this interesting emotional connection to the story itself, and it becomes very memorable that way. So even in journalism now, I say that you have to create these stories, you have to think about structure, you have to think about transformation and tension, because that's what's going to sort of power through all the noise that we see in this digital age. The other person who thought strongly about this, not Dillingham and Oler, but Joseph Campbell, in the Hero with a Thousand Faces back in the 1940s, and Joseph Campbell studied every possible myth, well, I think almost every possible myth, in various cultures, and found that there was actually a common structure to a lot of these stories, and that there was this hero's journey, that the hero was called to action, faces some life-altering problem, and then goes through a transformation as he or she tries to solve it, and then there's the end. Star Wars was based entirely on Joseph Campbell's book. If you look at even myths or stories within theological works, even the Bible, Frodo and Lord of the Rings, this idea of a hero being called to action and the transformation that occurs to it. The ultimate recipe to persuading and influencing in the 21st century in the noisy digital age. Tell stories, build a community around those stories, and then you can communicate. And it's as simple as that.